The sand between my toes was still warm when he asked me to dance right there on the beach. No music except the waves, and I thought my heart would explode from pure joy. Something I hadn't felt in 20 years of marriage. That had ended just 8 months before. I'm sitting here in my new home overlooking Biscayne Bay, still pinching myself that this is real, that at 62. I'm living a life I never even dared to dream about. But let me take you back to where it all began, because, trust me, you won't believe how this story unfolds. My name is Katherine, though everyone calls me Kate, and 18 months ago, I was sitting in my empty house in Indianapolis, staring at divorce papers that marked the end of a marriage I'd thought would last forever. My 3 kids were worried about me, Mom. They said, "You need to get out, do something for yourself." My daughter Emma, bless her heart. She's the one who practically forced me to book that trip to Miami. She sat right there at my kitchen table with her laptop, and wouldn't leave until I'd clicked confirm on a week-long vacation rental in South Beach. The morning I left for Miami, I almost canceled 3 times. What was a 60-year-old divorced woman going to do alone in Miami Beach? But Emma drove me to the airport herself, and before I knew it, I was on that plane, watching Indianapolis disappear below me, feeling like I was leaving my old life behind in more ways than one. The Airbnb I'd booked was nothing fancy, a small studio apartment. 3 blocks from the beach, simple but clean, with a little balcony, where I could have my morning coffee. The host had left a welcome note, with recommendations for local restaurants and attractions. I remember standing in that little apartment, my suitcase still zipped, wondering what on earth I was doing there. That first evening, I forced myself to walk to the beach. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink I'd forgotten existed. I found a bench and just sat there, watching the young people playing volleyball, the couples walking hand in hand, the whole vibrant life of Miami Beach swirling around me. I felt invisible, which was both liberating and lonely. The next morning, I decided to be brave. I put on my swimsuit, the one Emma had insisted I buy, despite my protests about being too old for a 2-piece, threw on a cover-up, and headed to the beach with a book and a towel. The beach was less crowded in the morning, mostly joggers and dog walkers. I found a spot not too far from the water and settled in with my romance novel, feeling slightly ridiculous reading about fictional love stories when my own had crashed and burned so spectacularly. I'd been there maybe an hour when I realized I'd forgotten to put sunscreen on my back. I was trying to contort myself to reach the middle of my back when a voice said, "Would you like some help with that?" I turned around to see a man, probably mid-60s, with silver hair and the kindest brown eyes I'd ever seen. He was wearing simple swim trunks and a faded t-shirt, holding a beach umbrella. He'd apparently been setting up nearby. My first instinct was to say no. I'm fine, the way we're taught to be independent and not bother anyone. But something about his smile made me hand him the sunscreen bottle. He introduced himself as Michael, while carefully applying the sunscreen to my back, keeping a respectful distance, chatting about how easy it is to burn in the Miami sun. He mentioned he came to this beach most mornings, had been doing so for years. When he handed the bottle back, he pointed to the umbrella. He'd been setting up and said I was welcome to share the shade if I wanted. I surprised myself by saying yes. We spent that morning talking about everything and nothing. He told me he was semi-retired, still did some consulting work, but mostly enjoyed his freedom. I told him about my divorce, my kids, my first time in Miami. He had this way of listening that made me feel heard, really heard, for the first time in years. When I mentioned I hadn't tried Cuban coffee yet, he looked genuinely shocked and insisted on taking me to a place just off the beach that he claimed Made the best cortadito in Miami. The coffee shop was a tiny hole-in-the-wall place I never would have found on my own. The owner greeted Michael by name, and they chatted in rapid Spanish, while I looked around at the photographs of old Havana on the walls. Michael ordered for both of us, and when that first sip of cortadito hit my tongue, I actually moaned out loud. He laughed, this deep, warm laugh that made something flutter in my stomach. He walked me back to my rental afterward, and I found myself hoping he'd ask to see me again. Instead, he just said maybe he'd see me at the beach tomorrow, if I was going. I tried not to feel disappointed, but I was at the beach the next morning. Same spot, and sure enough, there he was with his umbrella. This became our routine for the next 3 days. Beach in the morning, Cuban coffee after, easy conversation about our lives, our dreams, our disappointments. He told me about his late wife. How they'd been married 35 years before cancer took her 3 years ago. I told him about the slow dissolution of my marriage. How we'd become strangers living in the same house. On my 4th day, Thursday, he suggested showing me around Miami properly. He said he had a car and would love to be my tour guide if I was interested. My kids would have been horrified, getting in a car with a man. I'd known less than a week, but something about Michael felt safe, felt right. He picked me up in a modest Toyota Camry. Nothing flashy, and we spent the day exploring Miami. He took me to Wynwood to see the street art, to Little Havana for lunch, to Vizcaya Museum and Gardens, where we wandered through rooms that looked like something out of a European palace. At each place, he knew little stories, hidden spots, the best angles for photographs. He took my picture in front of a stunning bougainvillea wall, and when he showed it to me, I couldn't believe how happy I looked. That evening, he suggested dinner at a restaurant in Coconut Grove. I protested that he'd already spent too much on me. Lunch, museum tickets, but he waved off my concerns. The restaurant was right on the water, and we got a table just as the sun was setting. Over fresh seafood and white wine, our conversation went deeper. He told me about his struggles after his wife's death. How his kids had worried about him the way mine worried about me. I told him about the fear of starting over at 60. Not knowing who I was outside of being someone's wife and mother. He reached across the table and took my hand. His touch sent electricity through me, and I actually blushed like a teenager. He said that starting over at any age took courage, and he admired my bravery in taking this trip alone. I wanted to tell him I didn't feel brave, but the way he was looking at me made me think maybe I was braver than I thought. After dinner, he suggested a walk on the beach near the restaurant. The moon was almost full, casting silver light on the water. We walked in comfortable silence for a while, our hands brushing occasionally, each touch sending sparks through me. Then he stopped, turned to me, and asked if he could kiss me. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I hadn't kissed anyone except my ex-husband in 38 years. But I nodded, and when his lips met mine, soft and gentle and patient, I felt something inside me that had been frozen for years begin to thaw. We stood there on that beach, kissing like teenagers, until we both started laughing at ourselves. 2 60-somethings making out on a public beach, what would people think? But Michael said he didn't care what anyone thought, and looking into his eyes, I realized I didn't either. He drove me back to my rental, walked me to the door like a proper gentleman, kissed me goodnight, and asked if I'd spend the next day with him. I had only 2 days left in Miami, and I said yes without hesitation. Friday morning, he picked me up early, and said he wanted to show me his favorite place in all of Miami. We drove to Key Biscayne, and he took me to a private beach club. I started to worry about the cost, but he said he was a member and not to worry about it. We spent the morning swimming in the crystal clear water, lounging on pristine sand. eating fresh fruit and drinking mimosas. Over lunch at the club's restaurant, he asked about my life back in Indianapolis. What did I do? What were my plans now that I was divorced? I told him I'd been a high school English teacher for 30 years, retired 5 years ago. That I'd been thinking about volunteering. Maybe traveling more if I could afford it. He asked if I'd ever considered living somewhere else, somewhere warmer. The question hung in the air between us, loaded with possibility. That afternoon, he took me to his boat. I'd assumed when he mentioned having a boat that it would be a little fishing boat. Maybe something he pottered around in on weekends. But when we got to the marina, and he led me to a beautiful 50-foot yacht, I stopped in my tracks. He must have seen my shock because he quickly said his late wife had loved sailing. And the boat held so many memories he couldn't bear to sell it. We took the boat out into the bay. And he let me take the wheel while he guided me. The sun on my face, the wind in my hair. His arms around me as he showed me how to steer. I felt more alive than I had in years. We anchored in a quiet cove, and he'd packed a picnic dinner. We sat on the deck, watching the sun set over Miami. And he told me something that made my heart skip. He said meeting me had made him feel alive. Again for the first time since his wife died. That he'd been going through the motions. Existing but not living, until a beautiful woman needed help with her sunscreen. I started crying, and he held me while I told him how I'd felt the same way. Like I'd been sleepwalking through life until this week. That's when he asked if I'd consider extending my stay. Just a few more days, to see where this might go. I wanted to say yes immediately, but reality crept in. I had a life in Indianapolis, responsibilities, my kids would worry. He understood, he said, but asked me to think about it overnight. He took me home, and at my door. He kissed me with a passion that left me breathless. He said whatever I decided, this week had been a gift. And he was grateful for every minute. I didn't sleep that night. I called Emma at midnight, told her everything. She was quiet for a long moment. Then said, "Mom, when was the last time you sounded this happy?" She told me to follow my heart, that she and her siblings could handle whatever I decided. Saturday morning, my last full day. I texted Michael that I'd stay 3 more days if the offer still stood. His response was immediate. He'd pick me up in an hour for breakfast. At breakfast, he seemed nervous, which made me nervous. Then he said he had something to tell me. Something he should have mentioned earlier but didn't know how. My heart sank, thinking he was married or something equally devastating. But what he said was completely different. He told me he'd been completely honest about everything except one detail. He wasn't just semi-retired from consulting. He'd sold his company 5 years ago, a tech firm he'd built from nothing. The sale had made him, in his words, comfortable. When I pressed him on what that meant, he admitted it was more than comfortable. The boat, the beach club membership, the beautiful home he'd mentioned. But hadn't shown me yet, he could afford all of it easily. I sat there stunned. Here I'd been worrying about him, spending money on our lunches and museum tickets, and he was wealthy. I asked why he hadn't told me. And his answer made me fall a little bit in love with him. He said he'd learned that money complicated relationships. That he wanted me to know him, really know him. Before his financial situation became part of the equation. I understood, but I also felt a bit foolish. Here I was, a retired teacher on a fixed income, falling for someone who could buy and sell my entire world. I told him I needed some time to process this, and he understood. He drove me back to my rental and said to call him when I was ready to talk. I spent the afternoon walking on the beach, thinking. The money didn't change who he was, the kind, thoughtful, funny man who'd made me laugh and feel beautiful again. But it did complicate things. What would people think? That I was after his money? What would my kids think? I called Emma again, and her response surprised me. She said, "Mom, you supported Dad through law school, raised 3 kids, taught thousands of students. You've earned every bit of happiness that comes your way. Don't let pride or fear rob you of joy." That evening, I called Michael and asked if we could have dinner. He picked me up and took me to a quiet restaurant where we could really talk. I told him his money didn't matter to me, that I'd fallen for the man who shared his umbrella and introduced me to Cuban coffee. But I also told him I needed to know this was real. Not just a vacation romance that would fizzle when I went home. He took my hand and said he'd been thinking the same thing. Then he made a proposal, not that kind. He laughed, seeing my expression. He suggested I go home as planned, take a week to think. Then come back for a longer visit. A month, maybe, to really get to know each other. Without the pressure of vacation ending. He'd cover the expenses, and before I could protest. He said it would mean nothing to him financially but everything to him emotionally. My last day in Miami, Sunday, we spent quietly. A long breakfast, a walk through a botanical garden. Sitting by the pool at his house, which turned out to be a stunning waterfront property that took my breath away. That evening, he took me to the airport, kissed me goodbye, and said he'd wait to hear from me. The flight home felt surreal. Had that really happened? Had I really met someone who made me feel 16 again at 60? My kids met me at the airport, full of questions. Over dinner, I told them everything. Watching their expressions shift from concern to amazement to joy. The week at home dragged. Everything felt gray after the vibrant colors of Miami. I went through the motions, grocery shopping, lunch with friends, book club, but my mind was in Florida. My friends noticed immediately, said I was glowing, demanded details. When I told them, they were split between those who said go for it and those who warned me to be careful. But every evening, Michael called. We'd talk for hours, about everything and nothing. He sent me pictures of the sunrise from the beach, our coffee shop, the spot where we'd kissed. By Thursday, I knew I was going back. I called him Thursday night and said yes to the month-long visit. The joy in his voice made me cry. We made plans for him to pick me up at the airport that Sunday. Emma helped me pack, insisting I take the new dresses we'd bought together. The ones I'd said were too young for me. When I walked into the Miami airport that second time, he was waiting at baggage claim. With a bouquet of tropical flowers. He kissed me right there in public. Not caring who saw, and I kissed him back with equal enthusiasm. That month in Miami was magical. He'd arranged for me to stay in a guest house on his property, close, but with my own space. We fell into a routine that felt both new and comfortable. Morning walks on the beach, coffee at our special place. Exploring different neighborhoods. He introduced me to his friends. A diverse group of retirees who welcomed me warmly. I met his children via video call. They were cautiously optimistic, which I understood completely. We talked about real things during that month. His health concerns, he'd had a heart scare 2 years prior. My fears about being financially dependent on someone again. His worry that I'd feel obligated to move to Miami. My concern that this was moving too fast. But we also laughed constantly. He taught me to paddleboard. Laughing with me, not at me, when I fell in repeatedly. I taught him to appreciate poetry. Reading him my favorite poems on quiet evenings. We cooked together, danced in his kitchen to old songs. Sat in comfortable silence reading our separate books. 3 weeks into my visit, we were having dinner at our favorite waterfront restaurant when he got serious. He said he'd been thinking about us, about the future. He understood if I needed to go back to Indianapolis. But he wanted me to know that he was all in. That if I was willing, he wanted to build a life together. I told him I'd been thinking too. That Indianapolis felt less like home every day. That my kids were supportive. That I'd never expected to find love again, but here it was. And I'd be a fool to walk away from it. He asked what I needed to feel secure about taking this leap. I appreciated that he understood this was a huge life change for me. We talked practicalities. I'd keep my house in Indianapolis for now. Rent it out maybe. I'd go back monthly to see my kids, or they'd visit. We'd take it day by day, but we'd take it together. That night, he showed me a ring. Not an engagement ring, he said quickly, seeing my expression. It was a beautiful band with a small diamond, a promise ring, he called it. A promise that this was real, that we were building something together. When he slipped it on my finger, I felt something click into place, like the universe saying yes, this is right. The rest of that month flew by. We looked at apartments together. He insisted I have my own space in Miami if I wanted it. Though he hoped eventually I'd move in with him. We visited senior centers where I could volunteer teaching literacy. We had dinner with his kids when they visited. And while it was awkward at first, by the end of the evening we were all laughing together. My kids came to visit the last week. And seeing them with Michael, watching how he made an effort to know them. How they slowly warmed to him, solidified my decision. Emma pulled me aside and said, "Mom, he looks at you like you hung the moon." My son David, ever practical, said he'd checked Michael out. I was mortified, but that everything checked out. And he seemed like a good man. My youngest, Sarah, just hugged me. And said she hadn't seen me this happy since she was a little girl. The day before they left, we all had dinner together at Michael's house. Watching him at the grill, joking with David, listening intently to Sarah's work stories, helping Emma with her baby. Who'd been fussy all day, I could see our future. Blended, complicated, but full of love. When I went back to Indianapolis to pack up my life, Michael came with me. He helped me sort through 38 years of accumulated stuff. Never pushing me to throw things away, understanding that each item held memories. He held me when I cried over my wedding album. Not from sadness about the divorce but from grief over the life I'd thought I'd have. He charmed my Indianapolis friends at my goodbye party. Fitting in seamlessly, making everyone comfortable. My book club made him promise to take good care of me. And he solemnly swore he would. My next-door neighbor, who'd watched my kids grow up, pulled me aside and said she'd been praying for my happiness. And it looked like her prayers had been answered. The drive back to Miami, we decided to drive. So I could bring more things, took 3 days. We stopped at roadside attractions, stayed in quirky motels, ate at diners recommended by locals. It felt like a second honeymoon, even though we weren't married. Yet, he said with a wink that made me blush. Moving in together was an adjustment. I'd gone from an empty house, where every sound echoed, to a home full of life and warmth. Michael was patient with my need for independence, understanding when I needed space. But also gently pushing me to accept help and care. He converted one of his rooms into a library for me, surprising me one day with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with first editions of my favorite novels. We settled into a life that felt both extraordinary and wonderfully ordinary. Morning walks on the beach became our sacred time, where we'd talk about everything or nothing. We traveled to the Caribbean, to Europe, to visit my kids and his. But we also found joy in simple things: Sunday farmers markets, cooking elaborate meals together, reading the newspaper on the terrace. 6 months after I'd moved to Miami, on a quiet evening at home, Michael asked me to marry him. We were sitting on the deck, watching the sunset, when he got down on one knee, bad joints and all, and pulled out a ring that took my breath away. Not because it was huge and flashy, but because it was perfect. A vintage Art Deco design he'd found at an estate sale, unique and beautiful. Through tears, I said yes. At 61, I was getting married again, something I'd never imagined. We called our kids together, put them all on speaker, and their joy was infectious. Emma immediately started planning, Sarah cried happy tears, and David offered to walk me down the aisle. We married 8 months later, on the beach where we'd shared our first kiss. It was a small ceremony, just family and close friends, but it was perfect. I wore a flowing dress in seafoam green, not white, because, as I told Emma, I'm 61, not 21. Michael cried when he saw me walking toward him, barefoot in the sand, David on one side and Emma on the other. In his vows, Michael promised to make every day an adventure, to dance with me in the kitchen until we're 90. And to never take a single moment for granted. I promised to always share my true feelings, to be his partner in all things. And to keep saying yes to new experiences. Our reception was at our house. With Cuban music playing, fresh seafood, and dancing until midnight. Watching our families blend, seeing my grandkids. Playing with having my 90-year-old mother dance with his 85-year-old father. It was more than I'd dared to dream. We honeymooned in Italy, something I'd always dreamed of, but never thought I'd do. Michael had learned some Italian phrases to surprise me, and watching him fumble through ordering in restaurants made me love him even more. We spent 2 weeks wandering through Rome, Florence, and Venice, holding hands like newlyweds should, not caring that we were decades older than most honeymooners. Back in Miami, we settled into married life. The surprise wasn't how easy it was, but how right it felt. We'd both been married before, knew the work it took, but also knew what we wanted this time around. We gave each other space. He had his weekly golf games. I had my book club and volunteer teaching. But we also prioritized date nights, weekend trips, lazy Sunday mornings in bed. Michael's wealth, which had initially made me uncomfortable, became a tool for joy, not just ours, but others. We set up a scholarship fund at my old school in Indianapolis. We traveled with our kids and grandkids, creating memories. We donated to causes we cared about. The money didn't define us, but it gave us freedom to live fully. A year into our marriage, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. The fear was overwhelming, but Michael never wavered. He came to every appointment, held my hand through chemo, shaved his head when I lost my hair. He made me laugh even on the darkest days, reminding me we'd beaten the odds finding each other, and we'd beat this too. And we did. 6 months of treatment, and I was cancer-free. The experience changed us, made us even more grateful for every moment. We stopped putting things off, stopped saying someday. If we wanted to do something, we did it. We started a blog about finding love later in life, sharing our story. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of messages from people who'd given up on love, who thought they were too old, too set in their ways. We became inadvertent relationship advisors, which made us laugh. 2 people who'd stumbled into love giving advice. Michael surprised me for my 63rd birthday with a vow renewal on the same beach where we'd met. This time, it was just us, the sunset, and the officiant. He'd written new vows, promising to keep choosing me every day, to make me laugh. Until we're old and grayer. He joked, and to never stop being grateful for that day I needed help with sunscreen. Our life isn't perfect. We argue about silly things. He leaves cabinets open. I'm perpetually late. His health issues worry me. My cancer could come back. Our kids sometimes struggle with the blended family dynamics. But it's real, and it's ours, and it's beautiful. Last week, we were walking on the beach. Our beach, when we saw an older woman sitting alone, looking sad. Michael nudged me, and I went over to talk to her. She'd just lost her husband, she said, and didn't know how to go on. I sat with her, told her our story, gave her hope that life could surprise you when you least expected it. As I write this, Michael is in the kitchen, making Cuban coffee. He finally learned how to use the espresso machine properly. In an hour, we'll walk to the beach for our morning ritual. Tonight, our kids are coming for dinner. All 6 between us, plus 11 grandkids. The house will be chaos, and I'll love every minute. People sometimes ask if I regret the years I spent in an unhappy marriage. If I wish I'd met Michael sooner. But I don't believe in regrets. Every experience, every heartbreak, every joy led me to that beach in Miami. Led me to him. My advice to anyone who thinks it's too late for love: it's not. Whether you're 60 or 70 or 80. Your heart is still capable of butterflies. You're still capable of passion, of giddiness, of that can't eat, can't sleep kind of love. You just have to be brave enough to say yes when it finds you. That vacation to Miami was supposed to be about finding myself after divorce. Instead, I found Michael. I found a love that makes me feel 16 and 62 at the same time. I found proof that life's best chapters don't always come first. Sometimes, when we're sitting on our deck, watching the sunset, Michael will take my hand and say thank you for needing help with that sunscreen. And I'll squeeze his hand and thank God for forgetting to put it on. Because that small forgot the sunscreen moment led to all of this, a life fuller and richer and more joyful than I ever imagined. They say Miami is where people go to retire, to slow down, to fade into the sunset. But for me, Miami is where my life truly began. At 60, when I thought my story was mostly written, I discovered I was just starting the best chapter. And let me tell you, it's been one hell of a page-turner. Every morning, I wake up next to Michael and have to pinch myself. This man, who could have anyone, chooses me, with my surgery scars, my reading glasses, my tendency to cry at commercials. He sees me, really sees me, and loves what he sees. And I see him, not the wealth, not the beautiful house, but the man who makes me coffee every morning, who still opens doors for me, who looks at me like I'm the only woman in the world. We're planning a trip to Asia next month. Neither of us has been. And we figure why not? After that, maybe Africa. We're taking dance lessons because Michael wants to tango. I'm learning Spanish so I can understand when he talks to our Cuban friends. We're living, really living, not just existing. My grandkids call him Abuelo Mike, and his call me Grandma Kate. They don't remember a time when we weren't together. And that makes my heart full. We're creating a legacy of love, showing them that happiness doesn't have an expiration date. The other day, my daughter Emma said something that made me cry. She said watching me with Michael had taught her what real love looks like. That seeing me bloom in my 60s gave her hope for her own future. That I'd shown her it's never too late to choose happiness. And that's what it was, a choice. A choice to take that vacation alone. A choice to accept help with sunscreen. A choice to say yes to coffee, to dinner, to a month in Miami, to a life together. Every yes led to another yes. Until I found myself saying yes to a future I never could have imagined. Michael just brought me my coffee, kissed the top of my head, and reminded me we have paddleboarding lessons later. At 63, I'm still falling off that board more than I'm staying on. But who cares? I'm in the water, in the sunshine, with the love of my life cheering me on. If you're reading this and thinking it's too late for your own love story, please hear me, it's not. Love doesn't check your birth certificate. It doesn't care about your wrinkles or your baggage or your fears. It just shows up, sometimes in the most unexpected places, and asks you to be brave enough to let it in. Sometimes, the best love stories begin with a 60-year-old woman who forgot her sunscreen on a Miami beach. And sometimes, just sometimes, they never end.